You're listening to the Catholic Family Podcast, Sundays with Father Denis. Straight talk and real Catholicism from Father Denis Chicoine, a true pioneer of the traditional Catholic movement.
What we would like to do also at this time, before spending a little bit of time on the Fathom Cell program, is to just read to you, as we were doing earlier, some of the statements made by Pope Pius XII and some of the bishops. And again, we'll be going from one subject to the other, but it has to do in general with morality. And I repeat, these statements were made in the 1950s for the most part. This is what Pope Pius XII said. An unworthy and immodest style of dress has come into vogue, not only at the seaside and in vacation camps, but nearly everywhere, even in the streets of cities and villages, in private and public places, and not infrequently in the very house of God. Again, this is in the 1950s. Another quote, "The Christian should be careful not to underestimate the dangers and spiritual ruin spread by immodest fashions, especially those worn in public." Thus spoke Pope Pius XII in an audience with the Latin Union of High Fashion, November the 8th, 1957. Perhaps the most important part of this address is that which sounds the death knell to the false application of the saying, "What we grow accustomed to does not affect us." And people say, well, we're used to that. That's the style. Nothing wrong with that. Here's what the Pope says. The most insidious of sophisms, which are usually repeated to justify immodesty, seems to be the same everywhere. One of these resurrects the ancient saying, "Let there be no argument about things we are accustomed to," in order to brand as old-fashioned the rebellion of honest people against fashions which are too bold. Should one perhaps show how out of place the ancient saying is to such questions? Again, Pope Pius XII. Therefore, when fashions are too bold, we never grow accustomed to them, that they cease to be a source of temptation against holy purity. There always exists an absolute norm, observes Pope Pius XII, no matter how broad and changeable the relative morals of styles may be. Style may never give a proximate occasion of sin, and clothing must be a shield against disordered sensuality. Again, Pope Pius XII in 1952. The decadence of public morality is a terrible thing. When by law the state restricts foul language and indecency in pictures and cinemas and theater, it is performing an elementary duty. But he adds, the strongest dike against the flood of immorality should be yourselves, with your resolute will never to take part in anything that goes against the law of God and the dignity of man, with your resolute and loyal will to support whatever, in accordance with God's commandments, is ennobling, purifying, and sanctifying. Again, the Sacred Congregation of the Council in 1954. But although these exhortations of the Supreme Pastor have produced not a few salutary results, it is nonetheless to be deplored that they have not brought about all that the Supreme Pontiff wished as regards public and private morals. Pope Pius XII sent a letter to the bishops all over the world. We read this letter, and he gave explicit directions that every 3 years, I believe it was, the bishops were supposed to send back to Rome a report on how things were being carried out in their diocese, and this is a reply to those reports. We all know that especially in this season of summer, there are commonly exposed to view sights which cannot but offend the eyes and shock the souls of persons who have not lowered or entirely abandoned their sense of Christian virtue and human modesty. An unworthy and immodest style of dress has come into vogue. We just read that to you. Not only at the seaside and in vacation camps, but nearly everywhere, even in the streets of city and village, in private and public places, and not infrequently in the very house of God. This exposes especially the souls of young people who are easily tempted to evil, to the gravest danger of losing that innocence, which is the greatest and loveliest ornament of mind and body. This matter is evidently of extreme importance, closely associated as it is not only with Christian virtue, but also with bodily health and the vigor and progress of human society. Most appropriately did a very ancient poet say of this subject, "To bear the body in public is the starting point of shameful crime." He quoted this from Cicero. Another sophism which Pope Pius XII addresses is the one so frequently used as an excuse for dressing immodestly. Quote, "He must have a dirty mind if the current style is such a great temptation to him." On this point, the Supreme Pontiff assures us greater sensitivity to the warning against the snares of evil, far from being cause for criticism of those who possess it, as though it were only a sign of interior depravity, is on the contrary the mark of an upright soul of watchfulness over the passions. Now again, when it comes to modesty, admittedly, there is room there for interpretation. In reading what the Holy Office has said, other than to talk about immodesty, there really aren't too many right down to the letter specifics as to what is modest. It simply deplores immodesty. But anyway, the one quote that has been used by most of those who have been involved in trying to promote modesty standards, that were used by Father Kunkel. Those of you remember him, he was a priest from Illinois that headed the Mary Light Crusade, and he printed reams and reams of literature in this regard. But anyway, here's the statement that was made by mandate of Pope Pius XII regarding modesty of dress to all bishops. We recall that a dress cannot be called decent, which is cut deeper than 2 fingers' breadth under the pit of the throat, which does not cover the arms at least to the elbows, and scarcely reaches a bit beyond the knees. Furthermore, dresses of transparent material are improper. Now, I remember on one occasion talking to Bishop Musey about modesty in general. He says, it would be a good idea. Why don't you have someone draw pictures and make a book and put, if you take this statement and draw a picture made from this statement, it concludes that we recall that a dress cannot be called decent, which, and then it describes. So if you draw a picture of what this describes and look at it, it says here this cannot be called modest. So then the standards of modesty would have to be more than what is down here. So again, you have various degrees. You have different interpretations. And again, unfortunately, we have, in some areas, we have the reputation for being those priests that are always talking about immodesty. Well, we don't just talk about immodesty. We don't always talk about immodesty. We do spend some time on it, obviously. If we see immodesty, we have an obligation to do so. The guidelines that we have given to those living in our parish are the guidelines that have been based on what I've just read to you here. And in some of the information that was put out, most of it by Father Kunkel, it talks about going into the church and how people must be careful, especially in the church. There's one code of modesty here that was approved by the Bishop of Belleville, Illinois. And again, this was Father Kunkel's bishop. And it encouraged women and girls and men to make a promise to follow these norms that are listed here, especially when they go into the church, the house of God. And here's what it says. Number 1, while I am determined always to dress with Mary-like modesty both at home and in public, I intend to be especially careful to do so when visiting any place dedicated to God. This includes, besides churches and chapels, also outdoor shrines, rectories, seminaries, monasteries, convents, retreat houses, hospitals, and other Catholic institutions. Above all else, I want to show the greatest possible reverence when in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament, especially during Holy Mass. Therefore, I will never come to church unless I am wearing clothes that give me full and reverent coverage, and that in every way befit the most sacred place on earth. I know that it is in this spirit that canon law directs that in the church, women should be modestly dressed, especially when they approach the holy table, and as a canon law. In making decisions about proper church attire, I will always consider God and His honor first, not myself. Accordingly, I will never use comfort as an excuse for improper church wear, nor will I follow the bad example of others. To show that I am not an unthinking slave of pagan fashions, I will always insist on truly Christian fashions, which do not even approach the improper, but keep a good distance from it. So again, you have some, not only in this area, but in other areas, that say, well, this isn't really a sin, so I'm going to do just this, and I'm not committing a sin. And they won't go 1/64th of an inch in a direction, but they'll stay right there on the borderline. And can you imagine if this is what was preached from the pulpit? As long as you avoid all mortal sin, you can do it's just a venial sin, or it may be an occasion of sin, but I don't think it really is, or maybe it's not, so you can go ahead and do it. Read what the saints have said. If we're unsure whether something is right or wrong, then why take a chance? If you're not sure, don't do it. And again, when it comes to the area of modesty, we're not saying that everyone should become fanatical in this regard. But we are saying that they should not be an occasion of sin. Pope Pius XII has written some beautiful, beautiful exhortations on modesty and on dress. And now one of the things, I can't repeat his words, I remembered his words, but one of the things that he says is this: God intended for men and women to attract one another, otherwise it wouldn't be marriage. This is God's plan. And there is nothing wrong with a woman dressing nice, dressing neatly, having good colors in her fashions and so forth, as long as she's not striving to be sensual. And this is where the problem would come in. So again, you can have some who will go too far in one area, who will be completely and totally liberal and do nothing. And there are others who think that if someone dresses nice, that they're vain. Now, there is such a thing as vanity. There is something very real that is called vanity. And you have to be very, very careful you're not motivated by vanity. But at the same time, again, if you were to read what the Holy Fathers have said in this regard, it's very clear. In Our Lady of Cane and Cell right now, we probably have about 12 young ladies, most of them attractive ladies. They wear their dresses, midi dresses. If they were to walk down the street, no one would say they belong to a cult or they look weird or strange. But they do not dress in a sensual way. And I believe that what they're doing is exactly that which is prescribed and which was meant by Pope Pius XII. Do you know that today, and out in the world even, it is in vogue to have midi dresses, suits? We were at the airport yesterday with Sister, and we were noticing this. I was commenting, Sister, look at this here. The length of the skirts. And again, modesty has more to do with length of skirts or length of sleeves. Modesty is really a virtue that is interior. And again, when you reflect on lady likeness, Mary likeness, that's an attitude. Someone could be modest exteriorly, but interiorly be immodest. Or they could have clothes that cover the body, but at the same time not really be modest. So there is literature that has been printed, and I would encourage you, if you have that literature available to you, read it. Literature that was printed in the 40s and the 50s. Men like Father Kunkel, who was really harassed and really persecuted for what he was doing. But again, he had the blessing of his bishop, and what he was doing was simply following the words and instructions of the Holy Father, Pope Pius XII, who was very much concerned in this area. And today, unfortunately, because of the breakdown in this area, again on TV, the movies, the newspapers, you have a complete mess. And again, it's funny how sometimes people can, in their own special way, try to make something sound weird that isn't weird at all. Let me give you an example. Supposing that a priest were to warn lay people about reading the public newspaper and just leaving the public newspaper laying around the house. Now, if someone was looking for trouble, they could say, what a bunch of stupid idiots. Now they're telling us we can't read the newspaper. Well, I read the public newspaper last week, and I had two priests in the room with me, and I held out to them page after page after page. I says, look at this. Who needs Playboy magazine? Look at it. Pictures of women in their underwear with very, very little on. Pictures of women in bikini bathing suits. This is the local newspaper. You're going to let that lay around the house and have your kid go pick it up and commit sins, or at least be an occasion of sin? Again, there's certainly a way of presenting that. And I wonder how many people have deadened themselves to the point where they really refuse to see the danger when there really is danger. And it's not being fanatical. Again, it's having a Catholic sense. It's true that you cannot shelter your children in such a way that you're going to lock them in a room and throw the key away. No, you can't do that. You have to train them, and you have to allow your children to be in a situation where they're going to be given a chance to grow in virtue. But again, when they're very, very small and they're being trained, you treat little children differently than you treat teenagers and young adults. You still take the safeguards with a young adult, but at the same time, they have a free will, don't they? And they're not going to be under your roof all of the time. Just like in school, for instance, we have the little boys as opposed to the teenagers, the ones in high school. Now, if we had a group of boys in school and we built a 40-foot wall around Mount St. Michael's around the school and told them, you can't go out. No kidding. There's a 40-foot wall there. There's no way they could get out. But if you took the 40-foot wall down and put a 1-foot fence and said it's not God's will for you to go out there, and they didn't go out, they would be practicing the virtue of obedience. And again, you have to allow them to be in a situation when they can be given an opportunity to practice those virtues. Because if they're caged in to the point that they can't practice virtue, and they're only there because they're caged in, what happens when they're let loose and they graduate? They're like maniacs. Like someone being let out of prison. And you can't do that, I repeat. But at the same time, those of you that are married, you have children at home, there are safeguards that you have to take in the home to prevent your home from being a place that can be an occasion of sin. And it is true that as adults, while most of what's in the newspaper really is not worth too much, at the same time, if you read a public newspaper and you are capable of not looking at the junk or taking the advertisements out and just getting rid of it or whatever, and it's not an occasion of sin for you, that's one thing. But what about your teenage son or your teenage daughter or your little boy or your little girl? Even when the movies were censored and something was put in the newspapers, again, by the bishops or by the priests, you would find that there was some ratings there it would say partly objectionable or not permissible for children. So again, as adults, you could probably see something or watch something that would not be for you an occasion of sin, where again, for a child or a young adult, it could be an occasion of sin. So again, you have to be very careful there that you know the difference and that you do everything within your power to see to it that your home, I repeat, is not for your children an occasion of sin. Another thing we'd like to bring up just in passing, we mentioned it earlier today, but again, it's how people can twist things around and make it sound as if you're trying to lead people along the path of God's holy will. Others can twist it around and make it look like you're strange, like you came from Mars or something and inventing all of these new things. When we talk about mixed swimming, as we were talking about earlier, whenever people hear this, it's happened with something crying out loud, can't even go swimming now. They're saying swimming's a sin. And that's not true. The brothers go swimming. The religious go swimming. Some of our high school students that are with the religious go swimming. There's a difference between swimming and what Pope Pius XII calls unrestricted mixed bathing and swimming. If someone is dressing modestly during the week and on the weekend they go down the beach where there's almost complete nudity, how in the world can they justify that? Does going to the beach give someone permission to just almost completely disrobe? And for some strange reason that not be an occasion of sin? If anyone can find me anything written by any saint or any pope that said there's nothing wrong with it, I still wouldn't believe it. But I can't find it anywhere. And we've been looking and doing a lot of reading. Because no saint or no pope has written and said it's okay. They've done just the opposite. They've warned about this. It was never done in Catholic societies. And if someone says we don't live in a Catholic society, say that's right, we don't. But does it mean that because we don't live in a Catholic society that we should reject the safeguards? Or that we have to come to the conclusion, well, because all of the Americans do it and all the Americans think it's okay, there's nothing wrong with it? You ever talk to any of the young people that hang around the beaches, that lounge around the beaches? You ever talk to them on a one-on-one situation? We have. Sometimes, unfortunately, parents can be naive and think their children are some kind of mysterious robots that have no emotion and no feelings. And that they can be in occasions of sin and not react to it. That doesn't make sense. Another area that's mentioned by St. John Marie Vianney, and this is even a greater problem today, And again, we're just trying to point out to you some things that have to do with morality, things that have become acceptable in our American society. What about those who frequent the taverns and the bars? Read what St. Jean-Marie Vianney did in his particular parish in this regard. Now, we're not talking about it being a sin to have a drink somewhere, to be a sin to come together with people. You can go to a restaurant and they may have mixed drinks there, they may have beer there, and you get it with your drink and you're having a couple of glasses of beer, a couple of drinks. We're not saying that's a sin. But you notice as well as I have the different signs that are posted on many of these bars. Topless go-go girls, X-rated movies. How could anyone justify someone going and associating in those places, calling themselves Catholics? Talk about a scandal. You have it right there. And unfortunately, in many places, it's become a way of life. Again, go to the nightclubs and the strip joints, etc., etc. This is the good old American way. It's not the Catholic way. And again, what we have to do as Catholics is to examine every single phase of our lives and see whether or not we're thinking like Catholics, and again, we have this Catholic sense, or if we allowed ourselves to be influenced adversely by the worldlings that run our society today. There's not enough that could be said on this subject. It's something that you yourselves as individuals have to look into and have to make a decision in regard to these things. I know we've said it in the past, and the reason we've said it is because at times we've been misinterpreted, without saying that it is a sin per se to watch TV. I know with my particular weakness in that regard, if I lived alone, especially if I lived alone, I wouldn't be able to own a TV because it's a hypnotic type thing. Puts you into a trance. And we've always told people the best thing they could do with their TV is smash it up with a sledgehammer and throw it away in the garbage. Right? We know people that have literally done this, just simply destroyed it because they said it's not worth my kids getting all goofed up. Most of the cartoons, even the Walt Disney stuff, you have the same thing in cartoon form. Just because something's in Walt Disney, you don't think that means it's infallibly good. Watch some of those movies yourselves and censor them. And then imagine a little child seeing these things and how he or she would react to it. One other quote we would like to make reference to again from Pope Pius XII, having to do again with morality in the family. In regards to the practices of Christian living, especially necessary today as an antidote against the seductiveness and contagion of corruption and worldly spirit in the appalling promiscuity of the enormous modern capitals. Everywhere, even in the country, but much more critically in large cities and the expanding metropolitan areas, religious tradition and old customs are endangered. They do not belong here anymore in our time, so we hear it said in a tone of contempt. Sound familiar? First of all, the pontiff continues, guard the seal of religion in hearth and home. Away with scandalous pictures of statues. In every family let the crucifix reign. Then the observances of daily prayer, frequent reception of the sacraments. Finally, opposition without respite against any resorts or entertainments of a kind that offend the modesty and refinement of Christian souls, and at which even the ancient pagans would have blushed. Inspire the faithful in your charge with horror and disgust for such abominable performances. These are the words of the Vicar of Christ. Again, who was so concerned, especially for young people. He said, the youth is the apple of my eye. He was so concerned. He was always encouraging the young people. You live in a very dangerous age. Don't allow yourself to be sucked in. He talked about St. Maria Goretti, a girl of 11 years old, who rather than to commit a sin of impurity, allowed herself to be stabbed a number of times and died a martyr. And he held her up as an example for the young people to follow. And just imagine the poor young people today. Unless they're being instructed by their parents and taught the proper way, it's almost unbelievable to think how a poor young person today would walk the straight and narrow. Because again, they're surrounded with bad examples. How fortunate young people are if they have parents like you who care enough to sacrifice at any expense to make it possible for them to learn the truth. How fortunate they are. Because again, you're 1 in a million, probably 1 in 10 million or 20 million. Without judging souls, again, there aren't that many around.